Alright guys, so let's talk about Europe today. It seems that the Eurozone is having a ton of regrets. They see this new world, the state of their economies, and it's obvious they need a plan B. And if we peer under the hood, Europe hasn't fully decoupled with Russia yet. Countries like Germany and Italy, they're trying to pivot their way back to Beijing as well. They see the chaos in the Middle East, they see the debt situation in the US, and they're gonna realize that the West is in serious trouble. And let's start with France first. Even after all the blustering and the bravado from Macron, Paris still loves Russian gas. France talks tough on Ukraine while buying up more Russian gas. Just this quarter alone, Macron has paid Putin 600 million euros for LNG. This of course is pissing the rest of Europe off. Everyone wants to cut away from Russian energy, but it's just not possible. Since the start of the conflict, parts of Europe has been getting Russian supplies non-stop. Belgium, the Netherlands and Spain, they have all been bringing in tons of gas exports. But the biggest spender is Macron. France imported nearly 9 billion euros worth of LNG since 2022. That's a lot of energy for a country that's quite diversified away from fossil fuels. It might come as a big surprise, but for a big economy, France is not that dependent on oil and gas. 60% of power comes from nuclear, 20% from wind, hydro and solar power, and it leaves only 10% of the economy dependent on natural gas. And this begs the question, why is France increasing their gas imports from Russia? The West seems to be moving away from Russian energy. We have seen it across all the headlines, but there are still countries buying even more today than ever before. If we look at the import changes, France has increased their volumes by 75%. They are bringing in more LNG even though they know it's financing Putin. It's helping to drive Russian revenues higher. Sweden is also up by 40%. Greece bought 36% more as well. There's a reason for this disunity in Europe. Everyone knows the ship is sinking, it's going down. We are moving closer towards a recession, and if you don't look after your own economy, no one else will save you. What we are seeing is posturing of the highest degree. Total decoupling is impossible, especially during this period of supply shocks. Just yesterday, Iran hammered down on Israel. The US is in panic mode and Israel has vowed revenge. According to their war minister, Israel will exact a price from Iran when the time is right. So the Israel-Iran conflict isn't over yet. It could spiral into a much bigger war which might destroy supply chains. LNG from the Middle East could get disrupted if things escalate even further. Over the past 4 years, the flow of Russian LNG to Europe hasn't come down. In fact, it has been trending up since 2022. Sanctions were never imposed on Russian LNG because it's a backdoor for many EU countries to get the energy they need. It kinda allows them to buy Russian energy on the low key and still go around lecturing countries that trade with Moscow. It's hypocrisy, but it's nothing new to us by now. When Nord Stream blew up, Europe lost a ton of cheap energy from Moscow, and this means whatever alternatives there are left will cost more. Europe now gets expensive gas from Norway. Their LNG suppliers are halfway across the world, from the US and the Middle East. The gas flow from Russia has fallen from 40 billion cubic meters to only 13 billion. That's a 66% reduction in only 4 years. And if the remainder were to decouple, it would trigger an energy disaster. Norway is now at full capacity, so the only option left is to phone up the USA and bring in more LNG from them. And I bet US companies won't give Europe a discount. They will just impose a big premium instead. It's just business, right? If you have a desperate buyer, you'll take advantage of them. By importing more Russian LNG, France is trying to stay competitive in their industries. They have seen what has happened to Germany, de-industrialization on a massive scale, and the last thing France wants is for their manufacturing to collapse as well. The French PMI for March is in, and it shows a further contraction. Both services and manufacturing are down, hitting 48.3 points. Anything below 50 shows the opposite of growth. It shows a contraction in French industries. Like Germany, the French economy is suffering hard, and to survive, they need to keep energy prices low so that when the upswing comes, they can recover faster. Some countries in Europe are waking up to the truth that Russian LNG still plays an important role in preventing a total collapse. The lower your energy cost, the cheaper your energy inputs, and that allows you to manufacture at a much competitive rate. Comparing power prices, it's obvious who is suffering more. French power costs only 25 euros per megawatt hour. Germany's energy costs are double, coming in at 51 euros. French GDP is expected to grow in Q1, and a big part of it is cheaper energy costs. Companies can still manufacture, people spend less on power, allowing them to spend more elsewhere. France and large parts of Europe are still very dependent on Russia for their economic survival. Now, actions are always louder than words. Europe might be on their soapbox shouting to decouple, but their actions really contradict the narrative. All we need to do is to dig a little deeper and you'll realize that Europe's economy is still very connected to Moscow. The first is this new policy to block Russian LNG. It's a workaround that allows individual EU countries to cut away liquefied gas imports, but yet no major importer wants to use it. It's just grandstanding. Now, could it happen in the future? Yes, it might, but in the immediate term, gas supply will still flow to Europe. And that's why it's bizarre when Europe goes around to countries like China and India scolding them for buying Russian oil. They are doing the exact same thing. Europe is financing Moscow. In April alone, Europe bought over 500 million euros worth of Russian fuels, and this makes them the fourth largest importer in the world, larger than Brazil and just one step below Turkey. The reality on the ground is destroying the narrative. So decoupling from Russia just isn't happening. Something big just happened as well. The third largest economy in the Eurozone is doing a dramatic U-turn. Italy is making a pivot back to China, and it's quite hilarious what's going on. Yellen is scolding China over their industrial growth. The Queen of Europe, von der Leyen, is also taking a tough stance on Chinese overcapacity as well. But there's another element in China's economy that can't be overlooked, and Italy is realizing that. Meloni is seeking a China reset. After ditching the Belt Road Initiative, Italy is running back to Beijing to seek forgiveness. And you can't make this stuff up. Italy is back for more money. They want to repair economic ties with China. So the charm offensive is back on the menu and it's from the Italians. And it's important we set things in context. Italy was essentially bullied, pressured to drop out of China's BRI project. It was part of the de-risking push against Beijing. So Italy scrambling to China is a clear sign that the West still needs Chinese trade to stay afloat. And let's understand why. To Italy, China is a very big trading partner. Exports to Beijing has been growing year after year. It went from 1.3 billion a month in 2017 to over 2 billion last year. So China buys a ton of Italian products, especially pharmaceuticals. Now this is a major trade. That alone has exploded up, especially from 2023 onwards. No one really knows why, but the numbers are quite staggering. Pharmaceuticals accounts for a fifth of Italy's total exports to China. So it makes complete sense for Meloni to secure this demand for the Italian industry. Decoupling from China just won't work. If Meloni pushes China too far, they will simply create their own pharmaceutical industry and take over the world from there. They'll drive manufacturing costs down and Italy will suffer. Now, a great example is the solar panel industry. Ever since China cornered the industry, manufacturing costs have essentially collapsed. The cost of a solar module today is 10 times lower than 18 months back. Any country breaking away from China could spark a new industrial push in that particular sector. So it's better to sell stuff to the Chinese than snub them completely and push them to compete with you. China is the second largest market for pharmaceuticals, just after the US. Chinese spending is expected to grow, hitting almost $200 billion in 5 years. And that's a lot of money on the table for Italy. That's Meloni's biggest export to Beijing. And if she lets that go, Italian companies will take a serious beating. She needs to keep the trade flowing. Another big factor is the trade deficit with China. In 2022, Italy's trade deficit with China ballooned to $33 billion. In other words, Italy imported $33 billion more from China than they exported out. Italy is heavily dependent on Chinese inputs to run their economy. And as these products get cheaper, Italy benefits more as well. It's no accident that Europe is running to China, and that's where the money is. Sooner or later, China's economy will recover, and Italy wants to ride the wave up as well. Italy is also trying to get Chinese companies to invest in Rome. The government itself is trying to get Chinese Chery Auto to build a plant in the country, and they're on the brink of losing the deal to Spain. It's important to look at what Europe is doing. The official narrative is decoupling, but the actions of the companies and the governments tell us a very different story. Now let's end this with Olaf Scholz in China, and part of me thinks he secretly likes traveling there. Just look at his smile, he sure as hell doesn't look sad. Now of course this trip is all about trade and saving the German economy. And that's why you have the top executives of Mercedes, BM, and Merck all heading there as well. And if you look at the headlines from the West, they are absolutely losing their minds. Why Germany Scholz is bowing to the Chinese dragon, ignoring pressure from Washington, the Chancellor seeks Beijing's embrace. And I think we are seeing a realization from the US that Europe still has some autonomy left. Germany is waking up from fantasy land. They realize that the economy comes first and not really Biden's foreign policy. Now, Schulz of course scolded China for overcapacity concerns. He instructed Chinese officials to promote free trade. It's like a Western obligation today to scold China at least once at every turning point. It's nothing new to us, but there's a reason why his delegation is filled with business leaders. The middle class there is exploding and there's a big market to tap. Schulz's business delegation is a reminder of Germany's priorities, which is to secure their future. There are a lot of headwinds facing the German economy. Companies like BP and Michelin are either scaling back operations or pulling out directly, completely. Germany is now facing rising corporate distress as well. Corporate distress means the inability of companies to pay their debt and other obligations. The next step is bankruptcy if things get bad enough. Ever since the war started, German companies have been struggling. The rate of distress has risen past 6%. The amount of distressed debt is rising. As manufacturing stays weak and domestic demand is circling the toilet, Olaf Scholz needs the help of China to survive. Decoupling is simply impossible. He needs a combination of lower interest rates, lower energy costs, and higher exports from Germany. And where else is he gonna get it? The only economy big enough to move the needle that's still growing fast is China. And here's how serious the situation is. We aren't fear-mongering here. The numbers show a clear problem Olaf Scholz needs to address. Exports in February has declined again. It has dropped by 2% month on month, 4 times worse than expectations. The selling price of German products aren't competitive anymore. The main drop came from the Eurozone itself. German exports to Europe fell by almost 4%. Europe itself is becoming much poorer. Olaf has to look beyond the EU borders to save the German economy. And this is simply reality. It all boils down to the economy and business. Scholz can't control global inflation. He can't force the ECB to lower rates either. So the only strategy left is to run to China. Now, a big wake-up call came from the German auto industry itself. And you would think that German automakers would be the angriest over China's cheap EVs, but that's not really the case. The German auto lobby are rejecting EU tariffs on Chinese EVs. They are afraid of a trade war and how German jobs will be on the line. If China hits back, German automakers will crumble. The current business with China secures a large number of jobs here in Germany. Sales to China are also helping the companies transform towards renewable engines. For decades, German companies have ignored the move to electric cars. To catch up, they need a ton of money and a lot of expertise. China has both. So if a decoupling happens and Beijing stops buying German cars, this will unleash hell on all the automakers. There will be jobs lost and revenue will dry up. China might feel some pain, but it will be magnitudes worse for the Germans. So we must look beyond all the headlines. Europe can't afford to decouple with China. They can't even afford to stop buying Russian gas. And that's how urgent the entire situation is. But let me know what you think. Is Europe starting to wake up? And are Germany and Italy pivoting back to China? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.